Good afternoon, and this is part two. We are continuing the issue of the very tragic situation after 9/11. In addition to the national tragedy, there also was a particularly Jewish tragedy in terms of those husbands who were missing but not clearly identified, and the status of their wives, and the steps that were taken by the Beit Din, the Jewish court, in order to avoid the problem of an Agunah. Agunah is a woman who is tied up, so to speak, that we don't know the status of her husband, and therefore she cannot marry because he might be alive. And we go to tremendous lengths, we discussed last time, we go to tremendous lengths in order to free these women in a halachically permitted manner to get married. And it's a very serious issue. If a husband is alive, then it is obviously a married woman living with someone else is of the most serious of offenses. And that's why it's not something that can be taken lightly. And very often you hear people who are very well-meaning but not well educated saying, well, if the rabbis really cared, they would just take care of this already, right? And they do really care, but it's not something, it's like saying, if the rabbis really cared, they would just take care of the problem of pig and just permit pig, right? Right? No matter how much one might care, one cannot just permit something. But tremendous lengths, they go to tremendous lengths in order to find reasons that with a halachic basis, with a Jewish law basis, that they can in fact be permitted. So last time we discussed that, and this is Rabbi Chaim Jachter, who through a series of 4 articles put all this together, and I am really just drawing from his teachings and his articles.
Did you give me one?
You need?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first case that we discussed last week was a little bit easier, right? And that's when there were remains of the missing husband that were found, and the issue was the proper identification of those remains. Excuse me. And we discussed the idea of a siman nikar, a very clear sign, nikar biyota, a very, very clear sign. And we discussed DNA, we discussed dental records, we discussed personal effects that do not get lent out. In terms of a businessman does not lend out his pants, or a businessman does not go to work at the World Trade Center wearing someone else's pants. So even though something, a garment or an item can be lent out, these are things that are not lent out. A person's wallet with his license and credit cards is not something that, hey, can I borrow a wallet? Sure. Here, no problem. We just don't give someone our wallet with our license and credit cards and whatever else we might have in there. Okay. The second category, which we're starting with today, is when the body was not found, but there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the husband was at the World Trade Center at the time of the attack, in a part of the building where all or most people were unable to escape. And the third category, the most difficult, is when there are no remains and no obvious evidence that the husband was in those parts of the World Trade Center which were basically unsurvivable. So let us go. The issue really is based on a Mishnah, once again, in... Dov, could I have one of those, please? Thank you. So on the second side, we have the Mishnah of Mayim sheyesh lehem sof or Mayim she'ein lehem sof. It's Yevamot 121a. Actually, it's the Gemara right after the Mishnah, which states, Tanu Rabbanan, our sages taught. So on the second page here, right, the second paragraph, it says Yevamot 121a. And here's where the problem resides. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught, Nafal Lamayim, if a person, a husband, fell into water, Bein sheyesh lehem sof, bein she'ein lehem sof, whether or not that water had a visible end, Ishto asura. Until we find that husband, the wife is prohibited. That is the opinion Divrei of Rabbi Meir. Whereas the sages, the rabbis said, and the ruling is like them. Mayim she'esh lem sof. If it is water that has a visible end, so if he got out of the water, we would have seen him getting out of the water. He didn't get out of the water. So he didn't find the body, but he fell into the water and didn't get out. Therefore, in such a case, Ishto muteret, his wife is permitted to get married. Even though we don't find the body, there's no way he could have gotten out. V'she'ein lahem sof. But mayim she'ein lahem sof, water which does not have a visible end, ishto asura, then the wife is prohibited, because we see this part of the lake. He fell in. It's a very deep lake, but right around the bend, right, he could have gotten pulled or swam, whatever, and gone around the bend and got out over there. We can't see that area. Therefore, we have no way of knowing, Alan. We have no way of knowing that the husband died. The Gemara asks, what is this? How do we categorize? What are the parameters of mayim sheyesh lem sof, that water that has an end? If you could stand there and see all the area of that water, and therefore if the husband left, we would have seen him leave. But otherwise, if you can't see those areas, we can't permit the wife to get married, because maybe he left. Maybe he got out.
Rabbi?
Yes.
In the case of the Titanic, for example, it was in the middle of the ocean, but people were also saved in little boats. How do you deal with that?
Yeah. So that's a more difficult case than the World Trade Center, as we'll see. Because in such a case, there were many people who were saved. Right? In the World Trade Center, if you were above a certain floor at a certain time,
right.
So exactly, but that's the idea of Mayim She'ein Lem Sof. If you can't see in all areas, you have no way of knowing for sure that the person isn't alive, that he didn't escape and he might be alive. And that's the issue that we are running into. Now, what's interesting is as follows. Even in a case, so we say the husband might have survived. Majority, in the case of the mayim, in the case of the water, majority survive or don't survive. In such a case, the boat capsized. We can't see every area. But we combed the area, we did what we could. But we can't see every area. Majority of the people on the boat survived, managed to get away somewhere, we just couldn't find them, or either perished or we found them. What do you say?
We found them.
Majority, right? If majority, either we found the bodies or we saved the people, right? It's a minority of people who might have eluded all of this and nevertheless stayed alive. Normally, we go with what's called a rove. We go with the majority. However, in this case, as we mentioned before, because of the severity of the prohibition, so we don't jump to go to the rove, to the majority. Okay, now, and that's going to come up again in a little bit. Let's see another source, because there are other circumstances and possible avenues for leniency. There is a Mishnah, which is Yevamot 122a on the source sheet. It says there, Me'idin l'or haner or l'or lavana, right? If the body was seen using candlelight or moonlight, that is sufficient. Me'sin al pi bat kol, if a voice was heard, right? A mere voice, right? We can accept that as testimony. Masa be'echad shamar al rosh hahar. It happened, a person stood on top of a mountain. Va'amar, and he called out, I am so-and-so, the son of so-and-so from this and this place. So-and-so, the son of so-and-so from this place died. And we went there, and we didn't find anybody. Nevertheless, and they allowed his wife to get married. Another case happened in Salmon. Be'echad shaman ish ploni ben ish ploni. I am so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, Nashchani Nachash. I was bitten by a snake, mate, and I'm dying. And he called this out so people would hear and allow his wife to get married, allow her to go on with life. V'loi kiru, they went there and he was unrecognizable. V'halchu v'hosiu et ishto. They went and they permitted the wife to get married. Now, there was a husband from the Belzer, a Belzer community that's a sect of Hasidim.
Before they knew he was dead.
I'm sorry? He called it out when he was alive. He called this out.
Dying.
We go there, we find a body, we don't recognize this person. We can't identify, yes, either he was distorted or we just don't know the guy. So we can't say, oh yes, this is certainly so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. Nevertheless, they will send back testimony, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so died, and they allowed his wife to get married. Now, in the Belzer community, there was a woman, right, whose husband, right, in the Belzer community, and this husband had called someone on the cell phone from a high floor in the World Trade Center, informed this person that he was about to die, and was on the phone with this person until the phone went, whatever happened, right? And based on that, and based on this Mishnah, so they said such a case is sufficient. Now what's interesting is there's a side point there, right? Is voice recognition over a phone, is that considered absolute identification? And la halacha, it is. Rav Moshe Feinstein has a teshuvah that if a person calls someone and authorizes him to give a get for his wife, right? That right, one can appoint a messenger, a proxy, a representative, a shliach to give a get, right? To get the whole get together and to give a get, and such a vocal over the phone commissioning is considered valid.
Do you need more than one witness in such a case?
No. You need the witnesses for the delivery of the get, but not for the appointing of the shliach. Okay?
But they have to have signatures to get permission.
Yes. No. There needs to be signatures on the get,
Right.
and the get needs to be given in front of witnesses, but one does not need to commission that in front of witnesses.
What if somebody says, this guy called me, he authorized me to give a get, and then they go and give it, and then the guy said, I never called this guy.
I don't know, from
Yeah.
what you said, it seems that it's very easy to free the Agunot, but the fact is that it's very, very hard. I do not understand it, that they heard somebody saying this and this died, and isiu et ishto, they let the wife get married. Just because they heard somebody, I know that
This person said, I am so-and-so?
But he did say, I am saying so. He said, Ploni, somebody else
the second case,
died.
yeah.
And they let the wife, just because somebody heard somebody and they let her get
Yeah,
married.
yeah.
But we know that it's like
Well, we're going to see.
putting the
We're going to
sea
see. We're going to see.
get,
We're going to see what it takes.
I wish it was
Now,
so easy.
another factor is that in order for Beit Din to issue a lenient ruling, we have to make sure that they were at peace with one another. Okay, and that is on the third page over here. The Mishnah says, a woman and her husband went traveling overseas. Shalom beino leveina. And as far as we know, they've got a good, peaceful relationship. There's shalom ba'olam. And there's peace in the world. It's not a crazy time where people are blowing themselves up and people are dying left and right. Uba, she returns alone. Va'amr, and she says, Mate Ba'ali. My husband died. Tina say. So she will be allowed to get married based on her telling us what happened. Mate Ba'ali, if there's a paternal brother involved, there's a yibum situation involved. Tityabein. Shalom beino leveina u'mechanah ba'olam. But if there was peace between them in their relationship, but there was the war was raging in the world, or or there was marital issues between them, the shalom ba'olam, but peace in the world, and she comes and says, Meis Bali, Einun Menace, she will not be believed. right? Because maybe she's just saying this, if there's problems in the relationship, maybe she's saying this in order to get out of this relationship. If there's problems in the world, then maybe she's assuming that her husband died because she hasn't heard from him, and there's a crazy time going on with war raging around. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda says she's got to come back crying with her tours, right? We need to have this this whole effect that it appears it's true. And they said, no, that's not essential. Different people handle loss, tragedies in different ways. Okay. So the Beit Din needs to establish, back to these cases of the World Trade Center, that things were normally good between the husband and wife. So there's no reason to assume that he got out and now he moved elsewhere, living elsewhere, and has changed his identity and started a completely new life.
Unless he found a young honey that the wife didn't know about.
Okay.
I mean,
there are always possibilities. There are always possibilities, but we have to go on basically what we, if we find out that he had lots of young honeys around, that'll be a problem. If as far as we know, right, he was, or even one, as far as we know, right, his one honey was his wife, so then that's an important factor, okay? Also, right, if the person has a regular pattern of returning home after work or after a brief trip, right? Is he a person who disappears for times, right? Assuming that there's good things going on in the marriage, and he's a person who normally returns home, doesn't disappear for a few days, weeks, or months, then the Beit Din can then start to move forward with his absence. Then they had to establish that he was in a part of the World Trade Center where very few or no people survived. Okay? Now, Rav Ovadia Yosef addressed a relatively easy case. A husband called his wife after the plane hit the North Tower, stating he was evacuating his office on the North Tower that was located above the 92nd floor. Anything above the 92nd floor, no one survived. Therefore, he called his wife. He was in his office. He was there when the planes hit. She heard him tell her all of this, right? That is clear. He is very clearly placed in that place. A more difficult case is when a husband called. He arrived at work, but he called before the planes hit the building. Right? So there's no evidence that he was there at the time when the plane hit. In one case, the husband called his wife from the North Tower at 8:20 a.m. The planes hit, I think we said at 8:56 it was, right? And was not heard from. So we apply a concept called chazaka. Chazaka, welcome back. Chazaka is status quo. If that's where he was before then unless we know otherwise, we assume that's where he remained. Right? The kashrut of the Eruv on Shabbos, we check it before Shabbos on Friday. If it was good on Friday, we have a chazaka. Our assumption is it has remained good. Now, an interesting point was brought up. Remember I said before that we don't, by mayim she'ein behem sof, water that we don't see the end, even though the vast majority, right, will be found either dead or alive, and it's a minority, right, who might have surfaced elsewhere, we don't follow the rove. We don't follow the majority. Now, this halachic concept of a chazaka, of an established state beforehand, is weaker than a rove. A rove, a majority, is a stronger indication than a chazaka, than a previous state that we assume status quo remains. So how come over here we're going to follow a chazaka, the weaker indication, when we don't follow the rove, the majority, which is a stronger indication? And an explanation that's given by the Rosh Kol of the Milwaukee Kol, Rav Mendel Senderovich, is that there is a chazaka here and a rove. The rove is that if a missing husband survived, the vast majority are going to
Come home.
come home,
Of course.
right? So you have a vast majority rove that if he survived, he was going to come home. And we have a chazakah that places him at that place, which was unsurvivable, and therefore we can go with that. So once we know that there was peace in the relationship, he's not a guy who would disappear for long spells.
Thank you.
Right? Then, right, and it seems he was there, then we could start to look for places of leniency. One such place is halacha in Shulchan Aruch based on the Gemara, which says, that's the last source I gave you, Shulchan Aruch 17:30. If he fell into a furnace, he fell into a furnace, or into a vat that was filled with boiling wine or oil or water, or we saw him getting slaughtered, right? And most of his trachea and his esophagus had been slit. Even though he might have gotten out of that vat and ran away, or after being caught, right? But whatever the case, after being caught, he ran, you can testify that the person died. Shesofo lamut. In such a situation, you know that guy is going to die. He might have ran a little bit, but he's not going to make it. And so too, situations where it is incompatible with life. That's the wrong one, sorry. There might be another one there. Miyad bisman karov hare eila me'idin alav. In those cases, we can offer testimony on that. That was just the last source over there. We can offer testimony. Rav Avadi Yosef, of blessed memory, ruled that this applies to those caught at or above the floors where the planes hit. We mentioned before they chose a large plane, primed, gassed up for a cross-country flight, right? It contained an enormous volume of fuel, right? Right? In order to save weight, so the airlines will gas a plane according to the length of the trip it needs to make. So they made sure to get planes that were fully gassed, right? So even though we did not see them, right? So that's like they were seen in a fire. Even though we didn't see them, that individual trapped in the fire, if we know that he was in that area, then along with this halacha, that is sufficient. There was a case brought down to the poskim where a husband was held prisoner at the bottom of the boat, and the ship erupted in a fire. And they ruled, even though no one saw the husband being engulfed in flames, but being he was on that ship, which was engulfed in flames, and there was no way that he could have gotten out, he was chained in the bottom of that ship, therefore it's testimony that the fellow died. Similarly over here, right, if they're in that building, there was no way to get out of that building, and this could be used as testimony. So there was a case where a train transporting troops fell off a large bridge, right? And the ruling was it's impossible to survive that fall. The plunge off the bridge was enough to testify about the husband perishing, right? Now, similarly, even if someone might have survived the fire, right, the collapse of the Twin Towers was a lot more violent than a ship, than off of a bridge. Okay, and therefore they ruled that that also was grounds for leniency. Now,
Rabbi?
yes.
I'm confused because you said in the first case of the guy who was above the 93rd floor,
Below?
above the 93rd floor, he still called and said he was evacuating after that time.
They wanted to. They thought they were.
They thought
When the
they
planes
could.
first hit, they thought they were going to evacuate,
Yeah.
right?
So if he was not,
But
hit,
it
he was
didn't-
not done in by the immediate impact.
Anyone above the 92nd floor did
Right.
not successfully evacuate. There were no successful evacuations from anyone from those floors and up. Right? The lower floors were able to get out. Anyone above those floors, there were no successful
People are
evacuations.
always optimistic. They
Sorry?
don't understand what's going on above or below.
Look, I think we all remember that day very well.
Yes.
I don't think any of us dreamed
No.
that that the towers were going to just incinerate and implode,
Absolutely.
right?
I was standing and laughing because I thought it was like the War of the World, that people got hysterical. It was a movie. I mean, how could you imagine?
That it was true.
I am ashamed
Yeah.
of myself, but that's what I did.
It's hard to imagine it was true. Yeah. Okay. So how do we deal with this mayim she'ein lahem sof issue? So there are many, but Rav Schachter brings 6 leniencies that were applied. Again, mayim she'ein lahem sof is water, she'ein lahem sof, that you can't see in all directions. So the person might have escaped. So over here, right, maybe the person escaped, the person survived, and we don't know about it. Okay. So first of all, this mayim she'ein lahem sof is because there's a minority of cases that might survive. The reason we're concerned about mayim she'ein lahem sof is because of the minority of cases. However, here, anyone who was above that, right, at or above, to the best of our knowledge, no one survived. Therefore, it's a question, is this really comparable to this mayim she'ein lahem sof case? There's a good chance someone survived. Here, there's virtually no chance that anyone survived.
Unless they were on the staircase coming down.
Well, those who were already on this one staircase of the South Tower, some of them did survive,
Some did.
injured terribly. Anyone above that, or by the North Tower, there was no one. So by the ocean, there's a good chance, there's a good possibility that he might have gone somewhere else. Right? We can't see. Maybe he came out right around the bend there. Right around the bend there, behind those rocks, he might have come out. So over here, it's a suffix, it's a doubt. Is this comparable to mayim she'ein lahem sof or not? Now, this mayim she'ein lahem sof case is a rabbinic ruling that we have to be strict in such a case. When we have a suffix, an unsurety, if this fits into the category of that rabbinic ruling, so therefore we can say suffix rabbanon lahakel. Where there's a doubt about a rabbinic ruling, there we can rule leniently when it comes to that. Rav Moshe Zatzal, Rav Moshe Feinstein, this is after the Holocaust, he answered many, many shilas about agunos. And he said as follows. He said the mayim she'ein lahem sof stringency that the Gemara gives is where one or a few individuals are missing. In such a case, there we can apply this stringency where one or a few people are missing. However, where large numbers of people are missing, where you have thousands, millions of people, hundreds of thousands, millions that died, hundreds of thousands that were displaced, right? So there he says, we can't apply this stringent ruling to such a large percentage of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people. And therefore he said there's adequate knowledge that a husband was taken to a Nazi concentration camp and has not been heard from in the years following the war, right? And there's no reason to believe he's in the Soviet Union, because those who made it into the Soviet Union were behind the Iron Curtain, and we often did not know what was going on with them, right? So he ruled that he permitted the wife to marry, even though a minority of people did survive the camps. Now, that is a very bold ruling that a Rav Moshe can make, because we hear it, well, not so much now, but in recent years we've heard of reunifications, right? Not of husband and wives, but of brothers, siblings, yeah. We've heard stories that each one assumed the other one was dead. I think it was mostly in the Soviet Union. I think that's where most of it was, that one was inside the Soviet Union, the other was outside. But that's Rav Moshe's ruling, which again is a very, very bold ruling. Okay? But he says this applies, this stringency of the sages applies for a few cases, not for a mass case. Third is a concept called Trei Rube. Trei Rube means you have two majorities. Right? Chaim Volozhin issued a ruling, right, in the time of Vilna, in the time of the Vilna Gaon even, right? A man fell from a tall bridge onto ice, and then from the ice, he fell into water, and there was no outlet from that water, and the body was never found. So this is Trey Rube. First of all, from the bridge onto the ice, chances are you're not going to survive. And people who are swept from ice into water with no outlet and are not found, chances are right now it's possible that he got out, climbed his way out. Very, very improbable. Trey Rube. When there are two roves, then we can be lenient. Many people did not agree. Many of the earlier poskim did not agree with this Trey Rube. However, this Trey Rube concept, the two majorities, has been accepted amongst poskim, right? But they also like to have then the caveat that the husband has been missing for quite some time. Rav Moshe used this case of this idea of Trey Rube when a plane crashed into the English Channel during World War II. So most people don't survive a plane crash into the channel, into the waters. And if you do survive the plane crash, right, then you're not going to, right, and if you're not found or you don't make it out, then you're not going to survive. If you survive the crash, you're not going to survive the ocean, right? So that's what he applied these Trey Rube. Right? Similarly, Rav Avadia Yosef applied this to the World Trade Center. Most or all people above the point of the plane's impact perished. Right? And vast majority of those who survived were discovered by the rescuers. Right? Tremendous effort was going on, right? Both during and after, to locate any survivors. So one rove is, right, people above those floors, vast majority did not survive. And anyone who might have survived, did survive, would have been found by the rescuers. So to say that he survived and somehow he eluded the rescuers and is now in some farm in Iowa, right, that goes against these Trey Rube, right, and therefore we can apply the idea of Trey Rube over here.
Evidently, there's a movie right now of a plane that crashed in the English Channel and the heroic efforts of saving everybody on the plane.
Yeah.
Just right now.
Yeah.
No, it's
The Hudson River.
I thought that the one in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The English.
But the Hudson was that was a masterful landing. It wasn't a crash.
Sully. It's called Sully.
Yeah, that was a landing in the Hudson, and right there, right.
Everybody came.
Yeah, the rescue, everything was right there. Okay, now this fourth leniency is a fascinating leniency. Again, why are we concerned by Mayim She'en himself? He might have gotten out somewhere, right? The Gemara discusses, let's say he is a famed Talmudic scholar. So there we can assume if he got out, we would have heard about it. The Gemara says, but lo plug, we can't start to differentiate how well known was this person that word would have traveled. So the Gemara entertains the idea that we would have heard about it. Word would travel, but the Gemara rejects it because, granted, in some cases it might, in other cases it won't, and therefore they made across-the-board ruling. Now, in the late medieval period, the Trumot Hadeshen said that nowadays, in the medieval period, nowadays, he said, there's more reason to be lenient because there is better communication since the time of the Gemara, right? So if a person got out, word is going to get around. Now, that was not accepted. Shulchan Aruch did not accept that. Shulchan Aruch was in the 1500s, right? Communication then was quite different. The Chasam Sofer, in the early 1800s, he said, well, now there's more room to be lenient. Because he said there are post offices in every village and newspapers that spread news throughout the world in the early 1800s. So if the husband survived, then the local rabbi would send letters and would advertise the man's alive. Right? And this was discussed and debated strongly, but in the 1800s, it was more accepted than it was in the medieval period. Rav Moshe Zatzal, after the Holocaust in the 1950s, he says, well, since the early 1800s to 1950, look where communication had gone, right, from Pony Express already to the communication 1950s, which we laugh at now.
Now we have iPhones.
Right? But he says that word gets out. So Rav Avadia, who wrote, this is in 2001 now, right? Which again, the communication that we've gone from 2001 to 2016 is astounding. But in 2001, Rav Avadia ruled that that certainly that is a factor. Now, we don't rely, poskim do not rely on that alone, because doing so would completely eliminate a whole rule from the Gemara. However, once the Beit Din have established they were on good terms, and therefore there's no assumption that he used this way, that he used this as a means of running off with his honey and establishing a new identity somewhere else, therefore this can be used as a factor for leniency. It's not a stand-alone factor, but it's a factor for leniency.
There was a French movie that took place in the medieval times. In the movie, nobody had pictures of each other. We didn't know what people looked like. They didn't have telephones, they didn't have anything. And the story was a young girl married, and the guy went off to war or he went somewhere. And 2, 3, 4 years later, the guy comes back to the new husband. She has no picture. She has no memory. And they said, oh, don't you know he had this color eyes? Yeah. Oh, didn't you know he had brown hair? Did you know?
Why didn't she remember it all?
Well, she was a young girl.
Uh-huh.
And it was like a lot of time passed.
Uh-huh. Okay.
She had no pictures. There was nothing. And then people kept saying, oh, yeah, I think he had dark hair. No, he had brown eyes. No, he had this, and that kind of thing. And after a while, she kept saying, he must be my husband then. And she married him. Several years passed, and the real husband comes back. That's what the movie about. I'm
Yeah.
not going to go into the movie.
Yeah.
But in years ago, they didn't have any photographs. They didn't have
Right.
any of this stuff. It made it very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And people's memories forget.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can forget your husband.
Well,
You
it
got
was-
problems.
No, but it was a young married, and it was many years past. And
What
they didn't have pictures. They didn't have anything like that. You say it now because now we have it.
It's a given. Yeah.
Rabbi, if there's a certain number of years that pass and there's no certainty about it,
Excellent. The Fifth Avenue of leniency
Oh, that's
is the approach of Ida and Rabbi Eliezer of Verdun, who both say, the Gemara says the wife is forbidden. It doesn't say that she's forbidden forever in a Mayim She'ein Lahem Sof.
Okay.
And therefore, he said that if he was lost at sea and 4 years have passed,
okay.
then we can assume it's okay. So he says the Gemara doesn't say forever.
Okay.
But how long is that time period? So many people disagreed with this leniency. Again, the Beit Yosef, the author Shulchan Aruch, rejected it. And others have used it as what's called a snif lahakel. right? It's not a standalone argument, but if there are other reasons that we see to be lenient, then we could add that on to our list. It's not a standalone factor, but that could be added on to our other reasons to be lenient. And there are different opinions. Is it 1 year? Is it 2 years? Some say 4 years. In fact, Rav Avadia Yosef had advised the Beit Din of America, right, whose rulings we've been sort of following over here. That he advised them they should wait a year, that they should advise the women that after a year they can get married, or only issue their ruling after a year, right? Which is putting into play this Rabbi Eliezer of Verdun and Ida's approach to the Gemara. Good.
Now, is there a difference in approaches between Sephardim and Ashkenazim? I know, like, if Rabbi Avadia ruled one way and...
So the Sephardim were stricter in some ways and more lenient in other ways. When it came to a sveka, right? You know, sveka is a double doubt, right? Maybe this happened, and even if this happened, then maybe that happened. So they would employ a sveka, whereas the Ashkenazic tradition is not so much. Yet it seems in terms of waiting, they were more towards giving it more time than the Ashkenazic Beit Din. So there are
usually more lenient, except when it comes to women. Then they're stricter. I mean, really? No, I mean...
I don't know. Let's not go there. Okay. Now, a last
Rabbi,
avenue of leniency.
the 1 year though, that would be only in the case of a comprehensive, massive catastrophe like the towers. Other cases might still have to be the 4 years, yes?
Again, that's not a standalone halacha.
Okay.
So I'm not going to start to say in this case 1, in that case 4. We don't apply that as a standalone situation.
And are there any poskim who say it has to be longer than 4 years?
Roy Jafta didn't bring any. I didn't see any. Lastly, an interesting approach. The halacha is, again, mayim she'ein lehem sof, water, and we can't see all the ends, right? So the husband disappears. We're afraid he might be alive. So should the wife get married? No. Let's say she does get married. The Beit Din hears, hey, so-and-so got married. So there's a difference between lechatchila and b'di eved. There's a difference between what one should do, and the ruling there is she should not get married. And then there's a question, well, if she is married, she got married, does she have to leave that husband or not? And b'di eved, the Beit Din does not require her to separate from her new husband.
What about the children, if she had children?
The children
That's a problem.
might have the status of a suffek mamzer. Right? Right? Now, there is a ruling that shat hadchak ke b'di'eved dami. Shas hadchak, extenuating circumstances, will view that as b'di'eved. Okay? So therefore, in such a situation where we have the World Trade Center, or you have an Agunah case, right? So there, once again, this is not a blanket heter, but they'll use this as a snif lahakel. This would be an added on factor. This is a shat hadchak, this is extenuating circumstances, and therefore in such a case, we don't have to always follow the lechatchila, the ideal, but rather we can follow the b'di eved, especially when the ideal is going to leave a person without any future ahead of her. So these were 6 different factors of leniency that can and were applied. Now, let's say you had a case, let me go a little further, where there was no empirical evidence that the husband was there at the time of the attack. We know that's where he works. And he left the house in the morning, said, honey, bye, or didn't say honey, bye, right? Whatever the case is, that's where he goes to work. He didn't call in, right? And we have no empirical evidence. So there was such a case. One of the cases the Beit Din had to deal with was such a case. So there, they tried to build the case on the husband's pattern of arriving at work at the World Trade Center. Right? He got the husband's Metro card records for the month of August and September through September 10th, 11th. Right? So he knows every day, right? This is the train he would take, and this is where he would go, right? And that day, he took that train. Now, they also had elevator records for August. The elevator records, right, because everyone has to flash their ID card. Now, the elevator records for that morning were destroyed, along with everything else that was destroyed.
Right.
But he was able to see, yes, he takes this train every day, and he gets to the building at this time, and he takes the elevator within this time frame on every day. I imagine they were able to see the Metro record of that day, and it brought him to his stop at the World Trade Center. So therefore, with all of that, based on his patterns, right, he entered his office at the World Trade Center a few minutes before the attack.
What a shame.
Right? Yeah. So these patterns also helped to establish that the person was there at the time. Right? We can rely on patterns. Right? A woman is unsure. Women used to have to salt their meat themselves and salt the chicken themselves. If a woman is unsure, did I salt it, did I not salt it? So the Taz rules are based there based on an interesting case. Let's say I'm saying Shema, and I said the words, saying Shema, and I said the words, Al mezuzot beitecha uvish arecha. And I say, one second.
Is that the first paragraph?
Is that the first paragraph or the second paragraph? Where am I?
Happens to me all the time.
Right? Where am I? Right? So the halacha is you have to assume it's the first paragraph and you go back there. Well, let's say he said, Al mezuzot beitecha uvish arecha. Laman yirbu yimechem. And they say, 1 second, where am I? No, since you already started the third paragraph, you can assume that you followed your pattern. You know, Rav Shalom Shwadron, who was a great Zatzal, blessed Mary, was a great Maggid in Yerushalayim, and he used to always get people laughing. But then he would give his mussar that would really hit home. So he says, Rav Shalom says that one time he was there in Machane Yehuda, right? And Machane Yehuda is the big shuk, the big open fruit and vegetable market in Yerushalayim. And he's admiring these fruits and vegetables and looking at this and looking at that. And it's just beautiful there, all the different. And he's trying to remember exactly what his wife told him he should get. Right? All of a sudden, someone comes and hits him in the chest. Hard. Twice. And he said, what is that? He said, oh, Slach Lanu. He realized he was saying Shemona Esrei. Right? As we say Shemona Esrei, and all of a sudden we're traveling here, we're traveling there. We don't even know where we are. Okay.
That story when you tell it from the first time really helps me to
Good.
say everything about this.
Okay, so L'man Yirbu Yemechem. So if you've already started to say the third paragraph, we can assume you followed your pattern. And therefore, where were you? You were in the second paragraph. So therefore, if his usual, so Dayan Ehrenberg in Shuvot Dvar Yehoshua used that approach, if his usual pattern of travel put him at the point, right, he used that where a terrorist attack occurred in Tel Aviv in 1950. And he said if his usual travel put him there, and we have no reason to assume that there was any deviation from there, and we haven't heard from him, etc., 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 all of that was able to be used to put him there and to determine his death and to release his wife. So similarly here, Rav Schwartz, Rav Nechemia ruled that this could also be a consideration to be lenient in the World Trade Center case. case. Right? And especially because they had established his pattern going back, right, for well over a month of his pattern. So these were the horrific situations and shilas that came up, and you could see that every possible halachic means of permitting these wives to get married were used, and the wives were permitted to get married. Yes, Janet?
So two things. In the case of the woman who doesn't wait, you know, the ideal versus what is, what Rob would have put them under chuppah if there was still this question?
I don't know.
And then
I don't know.
the
Maybe
other
someone who
thing-
didn't know? I don't know.
The other thing, very briefly, in last week, you addressed the case of the missing wife. And so, even though the consequences to children are less serious, since there is
I'm
this
thinking
rabbinic
of
decree, and
Brian's
there's also
father.
civil law.
Brian's father,
makes it
the
difficult
baton
for
death
someone to
mark
have-
book.
Okay, so
There was,
survived
were as many efforts made for women who worked in the World Trade Center to research and
probably not. Probably not. In terms of, again, we mentioned last week that for a married woman to marry someone else is a Torah prohibition of the highest level and affects the children. According to Torah law, a man can have more than one wife. Rabbeinu Gershon came along and said, not a good idea, and we're not allowed to do that. Okay? But that's a rabbinic institution. So over here where you have a suffix derabanan, right? In terms of civil law, I don't think there's a problem in civil law. I don't think the city of New York, right, held up women from, widows from the World Trade Center from getting married. According to civil law,
I'm talking about
right?
widowers.
That's what I'm talking about. They're not going to hold back the men, right, or the women from getting married. Civil law was never the issue over here. I'm sure my husband worked there and he died, right, so then she is released and able to get married. Civil law was never an issue. The only question is halachic. Again, for a man whose wife went missing, so there the whole issue is a rabbinic issue, and therefore there was no need to go to such means to find. Again, in these cases, we know in our heart of hearts that the person is dead. The question is finding halachic justification. Right? We can't go on what we feel with every fiber of our being. When there needs to be halachic justification. In a case over there where min Torah it's allowed, so they're not going to spend all the time and resources. Obviously, if the guy's alive, you want to find him, right? If she's alive, you want to find her. But we're talking over here. How do we build a case of halachic justification when we're missing all of the normal key components towards ascertaining the death?
I got the impression that in other areas, the Rabbanan end up being what clarify and make some of the halacha. So why isn't that?
Again, if the whole issue is only a rabbinic issue, then in a case where we have no reason to believe that the person's alive, and so the effort was not invested in helping the husbands. The effort was invested in helping the wives. Right? And I think that should be a welcome point that I'm making.
I
Yes.
have a question. Realistically, do you know if there was any case that they couldn't solve?
I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think there was any wife who was left in Agunah afterwards.
And my other question is, I understand in cases like 9/11 that first of all, in our time, there is more knowledge, there is TV, it was, they found body, they found DNA, they found this or whatever. It's much easier than a regular, it's not an easier case, but I mean, for
Right.
the
identify
identify. But or in Holocaust, they try to be some rabbi more lenient. But my question is, we know that it's very, very easy for Agunah to get out of the status of Agunah and have enough rabbi or rabbi that will agree and accept her, get her out of the situation. There were rabbis that used to give all their life, to help Agunot. it's a very problem. From some of the thing here, it sounds very easy. I don't.
So a
think
lot
it
of these,
is.
what we called
So-
we said were a snif lahakel. They weren't stand-alone factors.
But I'm not talking about the 9/11. I'm talking about regular women in normal. That
Look,
we know that
The Agunah cases
terrible.
are cases where the husband has run off and we can't find him. We don't think he's dead. We know he's alive, but he's living in Peru. He's living in who knows where, and he's refusing to give a get. Right? So that's a whole different
But
world.
also, if he died and we don't know, we are not sure. They usually,
Oh,
at least
sometimes
in Israel,
they
the court is not
they try to
lenient.
expedite that, but that's another story.
They do.
Yeah.
So there's
I
no,
thought maybe you want to talk about this subject. And
no divorce in absentia then if the husband's gone 10, 12 years.
Correct.
Okay.
We mentioned that the Gemara says that in the time of King David, so men going out to war would give their wives a conditional get, that if I don't return after 10 years or after the war, right, then you are divorced. Because in those times, people we killed in battle, and there's no way of identifying, there's no guarantee that word would get back. Right? Look, even in World War II, we still have some MIAs, right? That we don't fully know, what happened with them. Yeah.
Why is Judaism so hard on women?
That's
in
what I
this
said. All the
sense?
effort went into helping the women. To answer Janet's question, nothing went into helping the men. Their wives were missing. They're on their own, right? These are halachot, right? If a woman is married, then for her to be with someone else is the worst of sins for her and for him, and has repercussions for the children.
But it keeps a lot of women in no fault of their own in a horrible situation. I know my sister, for example, that is really frum and everything, used to go some years that was a job, volunteering, going with a connection like the telephone or something on Shabbat, in order, if they found out that the husband want to leave the country or something, she'd be there right at the end of
To
Shabbat,
make sure that he could.
he's not leaving.
Yeah.
And this was a great mitzvah as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Some people think she wasn't frum
Yeah.
enough. But what I'm saying is, still in the 21st century, Judaism is,
So again,
the wife is really a chattel,
so-
or a husband. Or,
no, chas
no,
v'shalom.
I mean,
Dov.
look at the Pasha.
No. Yeah.
Yeah, don't take me.